There are moments in life when just one small action is enough to change the fate of an entire empire. That night, under the dazzling lights of a tech gala in Texas, a man stood calmly before an audience of 300 guests and was mistaken for a server. They laughed. They mocked him. They even poured a glass of champagne onto his shoulder, as if he wasn't worthy of any respect. No one knew that the man they were insulting was the very person holding the key to an $800 million deal that was scheduled to be signed just minutes later. And the moment he turned and walked out of that room, quietly and without a single word in return, it was the moment everything began to fall apart.
The Texas Tech Industry Gala unfolded in a space so luxurious it was almost overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers cast their glow onto the polished wooden floors, and soft country jazz drifted gently across each banquet table. Glasses of premium bourbon were raised like a ritual of status. People didn't come here just to celebrate, but to be seen, to size each other up, and to brag about being where the elite discuss billion-dollar matters. And amid that glamour, Eli Carter walked in. No diamond watch, no sparkling tuxedo. Just a well-fitted dark gray suit and the calm demeanor of someone long accustomed to not needing to draw attention. But it was precisely that simplicity that made him the target of judgmental eyes. A security guard stopped him right at the entrance, speaking politely yet with clear suspicion. "Sir, deliveries go through the back." Eli simply smiled and presented his platinum-edged invitation. The guard awkwardly opened the gate, though the half-doubtful attitude didn't fade. Stepping inside, Eli could feel the thin layer of discrimination drifting in the air. A group of young entrepreneurs glanced at him from head to toe, then whispered as if he had accidentally wandered into a world that wasn't his. A woman in a tiered sequin dress giggled to her friend, "It's Texas. Anyone can get in." Eli didn't respond. No irritation, no resistance. He merely observed quietly, as though he had grown used to such quick judgments many years ago. But what the crowd didn't know was this. His silence tonight wasn't weakness. It was preparation. Preparation for a turning point that no one in that room could imagine. When the clock neared 8 p.m., the lights focused on the main stage. The CEO of Bright Forge Robotics, Mark Sullivan, known for his gleaming white smile and slightly excessive confidence, stepped up to the microphone. Beside him was his wife, Kimberly, in a silver dress that shimmered as if cut directly from the stage lights. They waved as though the entire crowd had been waiting solely for them. Across the room, applause echoed, the reflex of people accustomed to an environment where everything revolves around whoever stands on stage. Everyone stared, except one person. Eli stood at the back of the room, silent, simply observing. No spotlight, no grand entrance needed. He stood like someone who was listening, yet his eyes scanned every expression, every movement, as if he could read the things no one dared to speak aloud. And then, Kimberly saw him. Her eyes narrowed slightly. A half-smile appeared, the kind of smile worn by someone who thinks they've spotted the out-of-place guy in a luxury party. She tilted her head and whispered something into Mark's ear. His smile faltered, then returned with a forced, unpleasant artificiality. Mark stepped off the stage, walking straight toward Eli with the stride of someone convinced of their own superiority. "Hey, buddy," Mark said, voice soft but dripping with condescension. "Staff aren't supposed to stand here. Go to the back." Eli lifted his head and replied quietly, "I'm fine here." Mark let out a laugh, not out of amusement, but disbelief. "No need to pretend. Nothing shameful about working here." Kimberly appeared right behind him. She took a glass of champagne from a passing server's tray and held it out in front of Eli. "Table 7 is thirsty. Bring this over."
Eli didn't raise his hand, didn't change his expression, didn't defend himself. Kimberly frowned. "Don't make me repeat myself." Mark took the glass from his wife's hand, then turned toward the crowd, exactly like someone who enjoys turning others into entertainment. "Let me help him out," he laughed loudly. And in an instant, the champagne was flung directly onto Eli's shoulder. The sound of liquid hitting fabric cracked through the room like a slap. Gasps erupted from multiple directions. Several phones immediately lifted into the air. Soft, mocking chuckles drifted through the luxurious yet chilling atmosphere. Kimberly smirked. "Now you know where you belong." Eli said nothing. He simply touched the champagne running down his collar, slowly brushing it away. Then he adjusted his sleeve, like a man preparing to leave, not someone reacting to humiliation. No anger, no shame. Just the terrifying calm of someone who has already made his decision. And when Eli turned and walked out of that room, the people watching had no idea they had just pushed an entire empire into the longest night of their lives. When the banquet hall doors closed behind Eli, the atmosphere in the hallway suddenly became unusually quiet. The soft music and clinking glasses behind him slowly faded into the background. All that remained was the steady sound of footsteps from a man who wasn't angry, but had already made his decision. The cold scent of champagne lingered on his collar. The wet streak on his dark gray suit blended with the warm yellow hallway lights of the hotel, creating an image the guests inside would never forget, but in a way they would never wish for. Eli stopped beside a potted plant and exhaled slowly. Not a breath of hurt, but a breath to shift from the one insulted to the one who names the price. He took out his phone, no hesitation, no second thought. One tap. The call connected instantly. "We're ready for your instructions, Mr. Carter." The voice on the other end needed no introduction. It was the voice of the highest-ranking legal advisor, a man who answered only to Eli. Eli looked straight toward the brightly lit elevator. In a calm tone, without raising a single beat, he said, "Pull everything, immediately. Lock every channel, and announce it within 5 minutes." "Understood, sir." The call ended. No background music, no explanation, no need for ellipses. In that moment, Eli's eyes were not the eyes of a man who had just been humiliated. They were the eyes of a man who had just pressed the button to end the future of a 2,000-employee company. As he stepped into the elevator, a few nearby guests turned to look. A woman whispered to her husband, "He's walking like someone who's holding something bigger than we think." Her husband replied quietly, "No one stays that silent if they're just an ordinary person." The elevator doors slid shut. One world inside the Gala was about to shatter. Another world, the one Eli was heading toward, was preparing to erupt. And it all began with those 30 seconds. As the elevator carried Eli down to the ground floor, the Gala room above felt as if someone had squeezed the life out of it. The jazz music, once flowing smoothly, suddenly cut off mid-note, like a needle dropping straight onto a record. The massive LED screen behind the stage flickered repeatedly, then went completely dark, leaving an unexpected void in a room filled with crystal lights. At first, the murmurs were just surprise, but as executives pulled out their phones, their expressions quickly shifted to panic. A vice president near the stage turned pale, unable to form a complete sentence. "Dear God, the company's main account just got frozen." Another shouted from a corner table, "All investors are pulling out. My dashboard is blood red." Words like illiquidity, contract breach, and legal crisis echoed from every direction.
The once glittering gala lights were now replaced by chaos. Wine glasses tipping and spilling, chairs scraping violently, tuxedoed guests rushing back and forth, phones ringing like alarms. The proud centerpiece of Texas's tech elite now looked no different from a battlefield. The host, who had been preparing to announce the signing ceremony, was yanked aside by an assistant whispering something into his ear. His face instantly drained of color. He stepped back on stage, voice trembling as if his breath was slipping away. "Ladies and gentlemen, the signing ceremony is temporarily suspended." The room went silent for 1 second, as if someone had muted it. Then came the eruption. "Suspended? No way. This is an $800 million deal. Who can possibly suspend it?" At the back of the room, a senior manager frantically made a call, his hand shaking uncontrollably. "This doesn't make sense. Someone ordered every trading channel locked." A woman in a black dress whispered to her friend, "There's only one person who could do that." Her friend asked, "Who?" But the answer didn't need to be spoken, because right then, a board member's furious shout tore through the room. "Stop everything! Who poured champagne on that guest? Who did that?" People began looking around, looking at the stage. Then, down on the floor, a guest was showing their friend a phone. On the screen was a video of Mark throwing a glass of champagne onto Eli. Close-up, crystal clear. Kimberly was standing beside him, tilting her head with a smirk. And below it, the bold caption, "They thought he was a server." He walked away like he owned the place. The room went dead silent. It was as if every smile had been drained all at once. And in that stillness, for the first time that evening, everyone began to understand that Eli's silence was not weakness, but the warning of a storm they were utterly unprepared to face. The chaos hadn't even settled when a board member, Mr. Matthews, known for his calm demeanor, suddenly slammed a stack of documents onto the table, startling everyone around him. His voice cut through the room, each word dropping onto the cold wooden floor like a stone. "Who poured champagne on that man? Speak, now!" Mark Sullivan froze. For a few seconds he still didn't understand what was happening, as if the world had switched to a new script he hadn't been allowed to read. Kimberly stepped back half a step, her hand gripping her sparkling clutch, which now felt like a cold piece of metal in her palm. "You're talking about the man in the video?" Mark asked, his voice trembling slightly as he tried to stay composed. "Yes," Mr. Matthews barked. A few investors nearby whispered to each other. "Don't tell me." "No way, but there's only one person with authority to lock trading at that level." No one dared finish the sentence. Mr. Matthews threw his phone onto the banquet table. The screen was still illuminated, showing an urgent email. Directive issued by E. Carter. Full withdrawal authorized. Contract terminated immediately. The entire crowded room seemed to lose all its oxygen. Mark stared at the line, then reread it, and again, as if his brain refused to absorb the information. "E. Carter?" he whispered. A director hurried to explain, voice shaking violently. "Eli Carter is the primary investor behind the $800 million deal, chairman of Carter Innovations. All decision-making power lies with him." The whole room collapsed in unison. When Kimberly heard the name, she covered her mouth, shoulders trembling. She stepped back again as if the ground beneath her had just disappeared. But the most painful sight was Mark's expression. Face drained of color, forehead slick with sweat, eyes wild and disoriented, like a man who had accidentally pressed the self-destruct button on his own company. No, this can't be real."
Mark shook his head repeatedly. Mr. Matthews had completely lost his calm. He pointed directly at Mark's face and growled, "You didn't just humiliate a guest. You humiliated the owner of the entire deal this company is fighting to survive on." The room went dead silent. A server standing against the wall spoke softly, yet everyone could hear it. "I knew it. The way he walked didn't look like any staff member." Another server replied, "Yeah, they picked the wrong guy. The kind of wrong you can never undo." Mark looked around, hoping someone, anyone, would say, "This is just a misunderstanding." But no one did. Kimberly choked out, voice breaking, We poured champagne on an $800 million investor." That was no longer a statement. It was a sentence. A sentence Mark and Kimberly had written for themselves, with arrogance, with disdainful eyes, with the belief that everyone beneath them was just the help. And now, the true face of power was exposed under the cold crystal lights. Not the power of the stage, not the power of a microphone or an expensive tuxedo, but the power of a person who doesn't need to raise their voice, yet with a single command can destroy an entire company. And that person had walked out of the gala just minutes earlier. That night, after Eli left the gala, the atmosphere inside the once luxurious room felt like a machine that had just been completely unplugged. The elegant laughter vanished. Crystal glasses were set down in a rush, and every gaze carried the same fear, as if everyone sensed that a very near future was beginning to collapse. But that chaos was nothing compared to what happened the next morning. Kimberly barely slept. She sat blankly at the edge of the bed, her hair messy, mascara smeared beneath her eyes, a complete contrast to the flawless image she had projected in the silver gown the night before. The phone in her hand vibrated non-stop, and every incoming call only pushed her deeper into despair. Mark kept pacing the room, shoulders heavy as though he carried the weight of watching his company plunge into an abyss. His shirt was wrinkled, his collar unbuttoned, and his eyes bloodshot from stress. He called one partner, then another, but the answer repeated like a cold verdict. "We're withdrawing from the deal. Do not contact us again." No negotiation, no explanation, just doors slamming shut, one after another. When the sun finally rose, the morning financial news released a headline neither of them ever imagined they would see in their lifetime. Bright Forge in freefall after investor humiliated at last night's gala. The stock price dropped straight down like a stone thrown into a deep lake. Every analysis, every article, every video fixated on one single focal point. The footage of Mark pouring champagne on Eli, along with the unmistakable disdain in Kimberly's smile. The board of directors held an emergency meeting, but the more they discussed, the more obvious one truth became. They had lost control of everything. Some members resigned immediately. The PR department was drowning in crisis. Legal advisors issued the warning no one dared say out loud. If Mr. Carter chooses to sue, Brightforge won't survive. At that moment, Kimberly broke down crying, her voice trembling. "If we don't apologize to him, we're really going to lose everything." Mark didn't answer. He knew his wife was right. But he also knew Eli might not give them any chance at all. After hours of sinking into despair, the two finally decided to drive to Eli's house. The quiet suburban road leading to the peaceful neighborhood was the complete opposite of the chaos they had just lived through. The sound of wind rustling through tree branches, birds singing softly. Everything made them feel smaller than ever. When Eli opened the door, standing there with his familiar, calm demeanor, the two nearly broke down. Kimberly stepped forward first, her voice shaking. "We were wrong. We treated you terribly. Please give us a chance to talk." Mark stood beside her, exhausted, defeated, and completely hollow. "Eli, we've lost everything. We're only asking that you listen." But what they didn't know was this, the most significant loss in this entire story wasn't the $800 million deal, nor the dazzling reputation they once had, but trust. And once trust is broken, sometimes a whole lifetime isn't enough to regain it. Eli stood at the doorway, the midday sunlight falling gently across his shoulder, the very spot where cold champagne had stained his suit the night before. He looked at Mark and Kimberly the way one looks at strangers, neither with resentment nor kindness, just with the calm of someone who understands precisely what truly matters in life. He didn't invite them inside, not as punishment, but simply because the distance between them was no longer the distance of a door. It was the distance between two different worlds. Silence stretched long enough to make Kimberly feel like she couldn't breathe. She clenched her hands and let out a trembling sob. "Eli, please. We were wrong. We treated you like someone unworthy of respect. If there's a chance, just one chance, please let us make this right." Mark stood beside his wife, his eyes red from a sleepless night and from a panic no CEO had ever prepared for. "Eli, I've lost everything. The deal, the reputation, the company. I just need you to give me a conversation. Just that." Eli tilted his head slightly, looking at both of them as if examining the very root of what brought them here. Then he exhaled softly, his voice quiet but sharp, like a verdict written long before it was spoken. "You didn't lose everything today. You lost it the moment you believed a person's worth was measured by the clothes they wore." Mark lowered his head. Kimberly broke into tears, but Eli continued, each word clear. "You built a world where belittling others became a habit, and you thought that habit would never come with a price." He paused, his eyes locking deeply onto theirs. "But life always sends the bill at the right time." Kimberly choked out, "We didn't know who you were. We didn't know you were behind the deal." Eli shook his head slightly. "That's exactly the problem. You never wanted to know." The sentence hit them like a blow, not because it was harsh, but because it was true beyond argument. Mark tried one last time, his voice breaking like a man reaching out while falling into a pit. "Eli, is there anything we can do? Something, anything?" Eli looked at him for a long moment, then gently shook his head. "No. The deal is gone. The trust is gone. And the door to my home will not open again." The breeze brushed across the porch, carrying a long, heavy silence with it. Eli stepped back into his house, but before closing the door, he left them with a sentence they would carry for the rest of their lives. "Watch your step. America is wide, but reputations are small." The door closed, not with a slam, just a soft, heartbreaking sound, because it closed off an entire future. Mark and Kimberly stood there like shadows, watching their empire crumble into dust. There was no one to blame, no one to point at. Only the truth remained. They had pushed themselves into this. As for Eli, he returned to his life, a life that needed no noise, no proving, and no revenge.
Because he understood, justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply walking away at the right moment.
That afternoon, as Mark and Kimberly drove away from the peaceful neighborhood where Eli lived, neither of them said a word. The road back to the city felt longer than ever, and even the sound of the engine couldn't drown out the heaviness weighing on two people who had lost everything. Not because of failure, but because of their own attitude. Life has moments that seem small, yet they're powerful enough to tear an entire future apart. And sometimes, what makes us fall isn't a misstep, but the disrespect we show towards someone else. Eli never sought revenge. He didn't demand compensation, didn't escalate the situation, and never said a word online. He simply walked away, quietly but decisively, letting the truth speak for him. The whole story didn't end with a scream or a lawsuit or a dramatic explosion, but with an awakening, soft as the wind, yet sharp enough to cut through one's thoughts. Because in the end, what defines a person isn't the position they stand in, but how they treat the people they think don't matter. And there is a saying every storyteller wishes to leave behind after a tale like this. Respect everyone you meet on your way up, because one day you might meet them again on your way down. It isn't a threat nor sarcasm. It's simply a reminder that this world is tiny, and respect has never been a luxury. Eli continued on his path, calm and steady, like someone who understands the value of kindness and composure. As for Mark and Kimberly, they had to start again from zero, carrying the most expensive lesson of their lives. One moment of disrespect can change an entire destiny. If today's story touched you, leave a small message in the comments. Who knows? Your words might be exactly what someone needs at the right moment. And if you want to journey more deeply into human stories like this, remember to stop by Deep Life Tales next time. A simple like or share can help the story travel farther. And who knows? It might change a day or a life. Thank you for listening. See you in the following story.